Okay, well, we are in chapter 8 of Richard Phillips's book, The Masculine Mandate, and this is going to be one of the more, I think, helpful and practical chapters of the ones that we've looked at. Yes, you're fine. You're fine. Do you always throw your phone around?
In the morning.
Okay, so the topic is one that a lot of us men, probably 90% of Christian men, feel a little inadequate about. Those of us whose children are already raised, we sometimes wake up in the middle of the night thinking of the mistakes that we made along the way, feeling the inadequacy of that. So it's really good, especially if you're coming in on the front end of it, that you haven't yet had children or they're still young. And it's all about the discipling of children. Will this guarantee that your children grow up to be perfect, perfectly adjusted, productive Christian young men and women? No. That's not a guarantee that any of us get, but it doesn't mean that we're powerless. It doesn't mean that we have nothing to contribute. There are very definitive things that we can do as men in order to see that our children grow up to be healthy and happy and well-adjusted young men. Hey, Paul made it.
I think a good way to put it.
We counted on it. We
I think a
depended
good
on
way
it.
to put it is I had a friend that they were struggling because their son was not doing very well.
Yeah.
And the wife was, what did we do wrong?
What
I'm
did we-
like,
yeah.
Look at it this way. God gave us the Bible. He
Yep.
showed us what to do,
Yep.
how to do it,
Yep.
where to go.
Yeah.
It's our choice to choose which way we go. It's the
We-
same with them parenting.
Yeah,
You did your job to point them.
Yeah. And you can always go back and think of things that you could have done better.
Yeah.
And that certainly is true for me, man. I do. I think about I could have done this differently. I could have arranged it. So it's helpful to have a game plan. Helpful to look at what some of the good principles are. If you go back to the Masculine Mandate, not the book, but the actual Masculine Mandate that he talks about from Genesis 2:15. Do you remember the two polarities of men's work, of what we're called to? Actually, one of them is work. What's the other one? To work and to man was put in the garden to work and to
Provide.
keep, which provision would fit in there too. But keep has that more protective aspect, whereas the work would be probably the more provision, and so on and so forth. And a father's work, in one sense, you could think about that. In the tilling of a garden, it's the working of the garden of the child's heart. Proverbs 23:26 says, "My son, give me your heart," and that kind of does a nice job of almost defining the role of a father in a family, because the heart is the key. The heart is everything that we are internally. It's all of our passions, our loyalties, our attitudes, commitments, character. It's the root from which sin emerges. Jesus said in that one passage that it's not what goes into a man that defiles him, but that which comes out of him, that comes from the heart. And that's all of those wrong motives and wrong desires and so forth. As fathers, our presence within our family is very key, but it's not the only thing, is it? Statistically, we know that if a father's in the home, that children tend to turn out to be more productive members of society, but that's not all that there is, not just simply being there. But in a sense, we are to gain our children's hearts. That's just a nice way of thinking about it. They need to know that we love them. They need to know that they have our hearts in that sense. So to have their hearts, they have to know that they have ours. Philip says children have to gain what they most desire, which is our affection, our approval, our attention, our involvement, and our time. He goes into a little thing about his father. Did you guys read the chapter yet? He talks about his father going to Vietnam when he was 12 years old. That's a very pivotal time in a young man's life, as you can imagine. And this is before the internet, as you know, before email, before FaceTime and Zoom calls and all that. But his father wrote him a letter every week. And he would get this letter, and it was clear that his dad was engaged and concerned about his son, that he was looking out for him even across the other side of the world. So he would say, "Hey, your mom told me that you were in the ball game, you did, you hit a home run," or whatever the case might be, and I'm proud of you. And then there might be one that would say, hey, your mom says you're sassing her right and left, and I don't want to hear about that. That shouldn't happen. But he was clearly completely and utterly engaged in his son's life, even halfway across the world. And that's what our children need to know. They need to know we're invested in them. He gives 4 ways to reach a child's heart, which I think this is just kind of his own wisdom on the matter. He doesn't really cite scripture to say these are provable, but he says there are 4 things that you need to do to really gain a foothold there in your child's heart. First of all, he says read to them. So yeah, I'll just give you all 4 real quick, and then we'll talk about read, pray, work, and play. So reading to them, he means in particular reading the scriptures to them. I think good Christian books would be included in this as well, but reading the scripture, not feeling like we have to be an expert. I think that keeps a lot of men from doing quiet time with their kids, like they're afraid they're going to get in there and show their own stupidity, like they're going to be reading an unfamiliar portion of the Minor Prophets, and your kid's going to say, well, what does that mean? And you're going to go, I don't know. And you're going to look stupid or something like that. But that we can't let that hold us back, because it's not just that we're teaching them the Bible. We're doing that. We're seeking to do that anyway. But it's also showing them what we care about, what we think is of highest value. And so it's like one of those things they say, it's more caught than taught. Bible reading, the emphasis of the importance of the Bible is more caught than taught. So reading in the scripture and talking to them. Yes, we bring them to church to learn the Bible, and we count on our churches to do a good job of that. But at the same time, Awana isn't all there is. And there's a disconnect for kids if they see, well, my parents dropped me off at church, but then they don't go. That's like, kids see that. But if the dad's reading the Bible to them and talking about the Bible with them, they're going to understand, okay, this is really essential to my parents, and therefore it's probably going to be important to me. We should pray with them, and by that it means we should be praying for their concerns, and also at the same time sharing with them our prayer concerns, because it's a two-way street, and then they see, yes, this really is, it's so important to my parents, the whole concept of prayer and their connection with the Lord, that they'll even share with me if they have a need and ask me to pray for that. That has an impact. I know my kids to this day, they still text me regularly, please pray for this, please pray for that. That's one of the things, of the few things I may have done well, that cheers my fatherly heart, that they still think having dad pray for them is of some value. We should work with them, and that is not in the sense that we have to teach them our trade. That'd be cool, like if we still lived in the 1700s and we were apprenticing our kids. But just the idea of engaging with them, that's a place where we bond. You'll see that in the church too, outside of the family, in the church family, just working together really has a way of bringing people together. And so teaching them to work, helping them build their skills, and connecting in that way is huge. And then he says to play with them, And if you're a man and you've got 3 daughters, as I did, all of the dolls become puppets. That's the only way I could really survive playing with dolls, was just to make them puppets and do funny voices and things like that. But he says also bring them into your hobby. So trying to play with them on their level with what they find enjoyable. But then as they get older, teaching them about your hobby, which of course should be, as we all know, what? Golf, exactly. 100% right. Yeah. Motorcycles aren't play. They're like a flirtation with death. But that could be good too. I don't know. So at the end of this, Phillips talks about how children go through phases, and we all know this intuitively. When our kids are young, it's basically, here's what you're supposed to do. Dad says this. Why? Because dad said that. And you punish more at that stage. You'll use a little swat on the behind or something to get a point across. But then they kind of age out of that, and we will actually use some amount of reason with them. Not that we should have to explain ourselves on everything, even when kids are older, but as they age, they want to know why, and we get into more discussions as to why we hold certain values, why we want them to do a thing and not do another. And then, of course, they're going to age out to where now it's on them. They bear the responsibility for their actions entirely. We're no longer anything but influence. And so all of the things that we talked about on the front end, they become the enduring influence. Like if we've had their heart and they've had ours, then down the road when they get into hard situations and so forth that they face and they're new and they're challenging, that's a resource to them. That's influence that's left over. And yeah, they're going to make their own way. They're going to make their own path. But what we put in will ultimately, come out hopefully in these circumstances. So anyway, big topic, and I'm sure you're all already experts. So let's have a little talk over our tables there. So